Okay, so think about this. Every single one of us, we operate by a set of principles.
Yeah.
Even if we haven't, consciously written them down. But what if really understanding those underlying rules and actually shaping them on purpose? What if that could be the ultimate cheat code? For success, I mean. Not just career success, but like your whole life. That's the really fascinating question we're tackling today. We're doing a deep dive into the thinking of Ray Dalio. He's the founder of Bridgewater Associates, which, is one of the world's biggest, most successful hedge funds. We're talking, north of $150 billion in assets. But Dalio, he isn't just some finance guy. He's known for this incredibly unique, systematic way he approaches everything. Personal growth, global economics, everything's all laid out in his famous book, Principles. So our mission today is basically to pull out the absolute key insights from Dalio's work, his writings, his interviews. We want to explore how he takes these really complex ideas and makes them, intensely practical. The goal for you listening is to maybe uncover what it really means to grasp reality. How to learn from mistakes, like really learn, and how to build effective machines. Whether that's your own habits or, a huge company, all geared towards hitting your biggest goals. So, let's get started.
Absolutely. And what's really compelling about Dalio, I think, isn't just him listing his principles. It's more his relentless push for you to really examine your own. He basically argues that this deep self-honesty, without worrying what other people think, that's the foundation, because it lets you live authentically, right? And you can measure your own progress by how consistently you actually stick to your own code.
That's such a critical point to start with. And Dalio takes this whole idea of understanding ourselves and learning to a place that, frankly, it makes a lot of us a bit uncomfortable. He has this pretty radical view on mistakes. He actually says there's an incredible beauty in making mistakes. Now, that just flies in the face of everything we're taught, doesn't it? Usually it's avoid errors at all costs.
It really does, yeah. Dalio boils it down to this, quite elegant formula. Pain plus reflection, progress. He sees every mistake not as, something embarrassing, but as a puzzle, or even a gem, he calls it. If you solve that puzzle, if you really reflect on the pain it caused you, then you get a new principle out of it, one that helps you avoid making that same mistake again. He genuinely believes that wrestling with our problems, our weaknesses, that's what makes us stronger. And the pain, ironically, is what helps us really appreciate success when it comes in.
I find that so refreshing, especially when you think about how much our society and education particularly drills this mistake phobia into us. We're taught, memorize this, get the answers right on the test. Whoever makes the fewest mistakes is smart. But like Dalio says, that actually hinders real learning sometimes. It just prepares you to follow instructions maybe, not really to handle the messy, unpredictable, and often painful stuff life throws at you.
Exactly. And Dalio's own story is, a perfect example of this. His biggest professional failure, what he calls his punch-in-the-face moment, that was back in 1982. He'd built up a reputation, actually, for predicting a big debt crisis. He was convinced American banks had lent way too much money to emerging countries, more than they could ever pay back. He bet heavily on it. And when Mexico defaulted, he thought, okay, here it comes, global crisis.
But it didn't happen like he thought. The Fed, the U.S. Federal Reserve, stepped in. They eased monetary policy, basically printed money, and instead of a collapse, the stock market took off. A huge bull market started. So Dalio was just profoundly wrong. He lost money, his clients lost money, and he had to let everyone go from his company, which was pretty small back then. He even talks about borrowing money from his dad just to support his family. That kind of failure could just crush someone.
Oh, it was brutal. Absolutely brutal. But the really transformative part is how he used that experience. It gave him this deep sense of humility, forced him to confront what he called his own audacity. And it made him ask this absolutely crucial question, the one that basically defined his future success. How do I know I'm right? That question led him to actively seek out smart people who disagreed with him, to really try and understand their thinking. And it led him to embrace risk reduction, diversification. So that really intense, painful process of what he calls struggling well, confronting his own fallibility, it wasn't just a setback. It was actually the true beginning of Bridgewater's long-term success. It just underscores how learning to handle that kind of extreme difficulty is, fundamental if you want to achieve anything really big.
Yeah, you can really see how that deep personal lesson from failing became the absolute bedrock for Bridgewater's culture, which is famously unique. He built what he calls an idea meritocracy, which sounds great on paper, but how do you actually make that happen? How do you ensure the best ideas really do win no matter who suggests them?
Well, the whole system there is built on two core pillars. what Dalio calls radical truthfulness and radical transparency.
Mm.
The goal isn't just excellence in the work itself, but also in the relationships between the people doing the work. He talks about integrity, pulling from the Latin root integer, meaning one, so being the same inside and out. And that demands a level of honesty that can be, frankly, brutally uncomfortable sometimes. But it's all in service of uncovering the truth and driving constant improvement.
Right. I can definitely imagine that facing those harsh realities, as he calls them, isn't easy for most people. Dalio himself points out that our sort of societal reluctance to admit mistakes and weaknesses in ourselves and in others, that's the biggest hurdle to being truly realistic and truthful. So how does Bridgewater actually get people to overcome that like fundamental human resistance?
He takes a pretty surprising approach. He argues that conflicts, disagreements are actually essential for great relationships because it's through conflict that you align your principles and you sort out differences. So open-minded disagreements aren't just tolerated, they're actively encouraged, even celebrated, because they fuel learning and ultimately lead to better decisions. The key is shifting the conversation away from personal arguments and towards a collaborative, objective search for the best path forward.
Okay, so if everyone's encouraged to disagree and conflict is seen as potentially good, how does that translate into, day-to-day operations? How do you make decisions without it just being chaos? Are all opinions treated equally?
Oh, definitely not. No. And this leads to one of Dalio's really key innovations, believability-weighted decision-making. It's basically about asking, has this person earned the right to have an opinion on this specific topic? So, believable people are those who've done the thing in question successfully, repeatedly, and they can also explain their reasoning really well when you probe them. This system allows decisions to be weighted based on the quality of the thinking and the person's track record, not just their job title or, how high up they are in the hierarchy.
That sounds like a pretty powerful way to cut through office politics.
Yeah.
And that kind of groupthink that can settle in. And didn't Dalio actually build specific tools to help foster this transparency?
He did, yeah. For instance, they use something called the dot collector. It's basically a digital tool. It lets people give and get real-time feedback critiques on each other. Critiques tied to specific points made in meetings, for example. And it's non-hierarchical. Everyone inputs their views, all the opinions are visible, it's all objective data points. Plus, most meetings are recorded and shared unless it's, genuinely confidential stuff. This reinforces the transparency. It allows people to go back and really probe ideas deeply, even after the meeting's over. It fundamentally changes the dynamic and moves things away from sort of emotional arguments towards this objective, data-driven way of figuring out which ideas are actually the best. And this is a classic example of Dalio's focus on second-order consequences, right?
Ah, yeah. Explain that a bit more.
Well, the immediate discomfort of having a really honest, maybe critical conversation, that's the first-order consequence. It might feel awkward. But the second-order consequence, the thing that comes later, is a much stronger relationship, faster progress, and a much higher chance of actually reaching your goals because you're tackling the real issues head-on. It's like, the pain of exercise, that's first order.
Yeah.
But the better long-term health, that's the second-order benefit you're really after.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, so moving from the sort of micro level, the personal principles, the organizational stuff, Dalio famously applies this same machine thinking to macroeconomics too. He sees the whole economy as this, surprisingly simple machine, driven by just the sum of all the transactions happening.
Yeah.
Really clever way to simplify complexity.
It really is brilliant in its simplicity. At its absolute core, he explains that the price of anything, a product, a service, a stock, whatever, it just equals the total amount of money spent by buyers divided by the total quantity sold by sellers. The really profound insight there, and what helped him see big market shifts that others missed, is just the sheer power of that simple framework. If you want to understand or forecast prices, you just need to forecast those two things, the total money flowing and the total quantity changing hands. And then when he looks at a country's longer-term growth, say over 10 years, Dalio sees two main forces driving it. Roughly 2/3 of the potential comes down to productivity, and the other 1/3, that's driven by indebtedness.
Okay, productivity, that makes sense. But when Dalio talks about productivity being 2/3 of the picture, what specific factors is he really looking at there?
Well, obviously, there are the standard things like investment rates, the cost and value you get from employees, that kind of stuff. But Dalio puts this huge, almost surprising amount of weight on culture. He talks about things like self-reliance, work ethic. He even points to data like average hours worked per week in places like India or Mexico compared to parts of Europe. Innovation, commercialism, and really importantly, sound institutions, low bureaucracy, rule of law, these are all crucial cultural elements for him. He even makes this interesting observation about China. He notes that despite its political system, it shows a high degree of what he calls self-sufficiency in managing its resources and balancing payments. He sees that as a powerful productivity driver, sometimes even outpacing more traditionally capitalist countries on certain metrics. He's not making a political judgment, you understand, just an economic observation based on his framework.
Got it. And then the other piece, the one-third weighting, is indebtedness.
Yeah.
How does that play into a country's growth outlook?
Right, indebtedness. That's all about the relationship between how fast debt is growing compared to how fast income is growing. The critical question is the new debt actually fueling future productivity? Or is it just borrowing demand from the future, creating a burden down the line? He uses this analogy of debt growth outpacing income growth being like a scuba tank. It gives you a temporary boost, sure, but the air eventually runs out. It's just not sustainable indefinitely. So eventually, the system has to deleverage. The debt burden has to come down relative to income.
That's a really clear analogy. And Dalio uses this whole economic machine framework not just for looking forward, but also for understanding the past, right? Especially these periods he calls deleveragings, when those debt burdens get reduced. Maybe we can look at a couple of those real-world examples he uses. They're pretty powerful.
Definitely. A really extreme example of a deleveraging was the Weimar Republic in Germany between about 1918 and 1923. After World War I, Germany was crushed by debt, made much worse by the war reparations they had to pay. The government's way of dealing with this massive debt, they essentially printed money like crazy, just unbelievable amounts. This devalued the currency into hyperinflation. It effectively wiped out the government's domestic debt, yeah, but it absolutely devastated people's savings and real wages. It was a chaotic, incredibly painful deleveraging through inflation and currency collapse. Now, contrast that with, say, the U.S. Great Depression. It started in 1929, lasted well into the 30s. In that case, you had nominal GDP just collapsing, incomes fell off a cliff, and debts suddenly look huge relative to those falling incomes. Roosevelt's administration tackled that with a mix of strategies. They had debt restructuring, but also stimulus. Things like the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC, lent money to prop up failing banks and businesses. The Emergency Banking Act helped restore some confidence. And then you had big public works programs like under the NIRA trying to boost the economy. So that was a deleveraging that kind of combined austerity and debt restructuring with significant monetary and fiscal stimulus, trying to ease the burden and get growth going again. And Dalio makes the point that the way a country deleverages, whether it's mostly austerity or default or printing money or redistributing wealth, there's only a few ways to do it. And the choice often comes down to politics as much as pure economics.
Right. What Dalio really shows us with these examples, I think, is that if you understand these fundamental economic mechanics, these sort of simple machine-like relationships, you can actually get a much clearer picture of where an economy stands right now. You can see the forces acting on it, and you can make much more informed guesses about where it's likely headed. It brings a lot of clarity to big historical shifts and potentially future trends too. Okay, so we've covered quite a bit. We've talked about the profound power of having personal principles, why Dalio argues they're just indispensable. We've looked at his really unique, almost positive view on mistakes, seeing them as puzzles, opportunities. We dug into the whole idea of radical truth and transparency, how that underpins an idea of meritocracy like Bridgewater. And then we journeyed through his elegant economic machine framework, using it to understand these big macro cycles and historical deleveragings.
Yeah, and you can really see how these ideas, they stretch way beyond just finance, right? They offer some incredibly powerful lessons for, well, for your own personal growth, for making better decisions, whatever field you're in, and just for getting a deeper, maybe more nuanced grasp of the complex world we live in. Dalio's whole approach really pushes you to look at reality objectively, doesn't it? To squeeze every possible lesson out of your experiences and to really carefully design your life, your work, to get what truly matters most to you.
Absolutely. And maybe to leave you, the listener, with a final thought, this one comes directly from Dalio himself. It's quite provocative. He famously said that the best things in life, meaningful work, meaningful relationships, interesting experiences, good food, sleep, music, ideas, the basic pleasures, he said, that aren't really materially improved by having loads and loads of money beyond what covers your basic needs anyway. He even said he'd rather be a backpacker exploring the world than some high-paid person stuck in a job he didn't genuinely enjoy. So as you think about everything we've discussed today, maybe ask yourself, what is truly driving your pursuit of success?
And considering Dalio's ideas, how are you actually designing your machine, your life, your systems to get what you truly want, not just what maybe society suggests you should want? We'd really encourage you to take some time, reflect on your own principles, maybe identify a weakness or two, not as a flaw, but as an interesting puzzle to solve. And think about how you might start applying some of these powerful ideas in your own life, your own work, maybe even starting today.